It takes strong relationships, unique insight, and inspired leadership. It takes staying in the know and making the most of every opportunity. Everything it takes is everything you'll find at CCPA. A resource for business support, a chance to hear from experts in their field and get up close and personal with city leaders. An insider's guide to what's happening and what's next in Philadelphia. With CCPA, business is personal.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see everyone here today. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Suzette Munley, most recently a partner at R2L Restaurant and the president of CCPA. I hope that everyone has remained healthy, and I know probably like me, you're very happy that it's spring and we can enjoy the beautiful weather, especially today. Hopefully everyone can get outside. CCPA is an intimate and diverse group of business owners, executives, and managers looking to build relationships and offer each other meaningful resources. We take pride in bringing you unparalleled access to speakers, decision makers, and leaders who are shaping Center City. We keep our members and guests informed about business challenges and opportunities in Philadelphia. Would you like to join, sponsor, or collaborate with us? Understanding who we are, what we do, and why we do it is as easy as being Center City smart. We have signature events available at a generous member discount. Get the inside scoop on development, sustainability, exceptional women leaders, city movers and shakers, and their connection to you. Marketing opportunities available only to members and sponsors. You can reach thousands of businesses and consumers at no additional cost. You'll have access to our speakers and panelists in a way few organizations can deliver. The up-close, intimate, and personal experience of a CCPA event is like no other. You can reimagine employee benefits through our exclusive discounted plans available to members only through Penworth Financial. And take the lead with opportunities to build your network, improve your leadership skills, and be a CCPA ambassador. So if you would like to join us today, we have a link posted in the chat. You will be on your way to becoming Center City Smart. Let's review a few details about today's event. We are recording this and we will share it afterwards. We will mute everyone to maintain our audio and visual controls. You can use the chat to ask questions, make comments, suggest a speaker or an event, and connect with each other. And there is a link in today's program in the chat. You need to take care of business, feel free to turn off your video. To touch on our future programming, it will still all be virtual. April 28th, we have lunch with city leaders with Councilmember Maria Quinone Sanchez. May 12th, Manu Astana, PJM Interconnection. He will talk about the electric grid and what happened recently in Texas. April 21st is Meet the Developers. And on April 23rd, we are kicking off our new Sustainable Philadelphia series. So you really don't want to miss that. Join us next week for our panel about business lessons learned with alumni of Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program. And you can find a full schedule of our events on centercityproprietors.org. I'd like to acknowledge our sustaining sponsor and our preferred benefits provider, Michael Craig of Penworth Financial Services. And Lunch with City Leaders is made possible by Citizens Bank and our sponsors, Community College of Philadelphia, Friedman LLP, KYW News Radio, Lev Lane, Post Brothers, and Visit Philadelphia. Now it is my pleasure to introduce fellow CCPA board member, our treasurer, Suzanne Spinell-Schuster from Friedman LLP.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Suzette. I am Suzanne Spinell-Schuster, Director in charge of Accounting Services at Friedman LLP. As a CCPA board member and treasurer, I am on the finance and sponsorship committees. So if you are interested in supporting one of our events or series, please send me or Ben an email or send a message in the chat. Friedman LLP has been serving the accounting, tax, and business consulting needs of public and private companies and individuals for nearly a century. In the wake of the most sweeping changes to the tax code in decades, with the inception of the CARES Act, PPP loan forgiveness, and other business challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, our professionals continue to inform and empower clients to best position themselves and their business for sustainability and success. Ask me for details or visit friedmanllp.com. Now, it is my honor to introduce today's speaker. Tayyib Smith is principal of Meta Global, the parent company to Little Giant Creative. He is dedicated to cultural competency and the ability to engage multicultural audiences. He co-founded Pipeline Philly to serve as an inviting and dynamic co-working space filled with professionals from various backgrounds and industries, creating one of the most diverse workspaces in the city. Tayyib is also a partner in S&R Holdings, a real estate company that engages and invites diverse stakeholders of neighborhoods to become part of a growing multicultural and multi-socioeconomic tapestry. Tayyib has long been a successful conduit of professional and cultural ecosystems. He is a fellow of the Place Lab Ethical Redevelopment Salon at the University of Chicago and sits on the boards of the Kensington Corridor Trust, Prism Art Fair in Miami, Memphis Slim House, Black Star Film Festival, and the Green Light Fund. That is so impressive. So please join me by waving a warm virtual welcome for Tayyib Smith.
Thank you for that. Thank you all for joining me. I especially want to thank Ben. I have to admit, I think the first two times he asked me, I declined. At first I was like, I don't want to be on a panel with those people. And the second time we had a conversation and I was like, you sure you want to engage with me? Because I'm not like the other people. And then he mentioned a bunch of hoity-toity city leaders that have been, in the last, 10, 15 years. And I said, well, I'd like to debate all those people. And then I realized that Ben was a really good guy, and this was probably something I should engage in. So I want to thank you for being patient with me and dealing with all of my, I like to say my traumas. And with that, let me see if I can figure out how to share here so I can have some talking points. Okay, you see how messy my screen is? There we go. So really quick, I'm really fortunate. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've had an agency in Philadelphia with my partner, Megan Denenberg, who I believe is here with us as well, for 15 years. And I've had a very untraditional trajectory to the modest success that we have accomplished thus far. So real quick, this is my parents and me in Fairmount Park in 1971. I like to joke that this is the most important thing to happen in Philadelphia in 1971. Bill Smith and Denise Smith, she was born Denise Fisher, and she changed her name in my youth to Sheba Dahomey. So I grew up in an environment of proud people of African descent who gave me a sensibility of my identity that I still hold on to dearly today. And if you know anything about Philadelphia in the 1970s, and the age of Nixon, and the age of Edgar J. Hoover, and the age of Frank Rizzo as a police commissioner, it was a difficult time and a place to be proud and Black. So I'll come back to some of those issues, but these are some of the ways that my partners, Megan Denenberg, Jacob Roller, across two of our ventures, Little Giant Creative and SNR, which stands for Smith and Roller and Denenberg, which is our real estate holding company. So we are very fortunate that within Little Giant Creative, our clients have ranged from Heineken USA, where we were their agency of record for about a decade, up until COVID. Grew that from a very small account to something that we operated in 2 markets and grew to be a best practice for an international brand, actually the 3rd largest beer company in the country. Today, we've pivoted a lot. So probably about 6-7 years ago, Megan and I started talking about how we could use what we've learned from working with brands, ranging from Red Bull, Visit Philly, Temple, Convention and Visitors Bureau, to use social impact to have a positive impact on community. This is my nephew's startup called Spirits Up. It launched last June in response to the uprisings. So a lot of us and a lot of you, when you think of yoga, you probably think of Gwyneth Paltrow as an image, or you might think of the person in Center City who owns a yoga studio. But in a city like Philadelphia, that is the largest and poorest big city in the nation, that is currently experiencing an uptick in violence that I have witnessed throughout my life, mindfulness, yoga, positive ways that people can use health and wellness in a response to the environmental depravity of intergenerational public divestment, particularly in Black and brown communities, is one of the examples I wanted to talk about of how we use our creative energy, our resources, and our networks to empower youth and work with institutional partners, brands, nonprofits, or community organizations to kind of rethink how we imagine progress. I'm having a little difficulty because people keep signing in. Okay, so this is a drawing of a project that we're currently working on at 52nd near the corner of Arch. It's an entrepreneurship hub, approximately 25,000 square feet, 5 floors, and If Lab, which is a concept Megan, myself, and Jacob developed, where our first model is at 3400 J Street, in a development that has about 30,000 square feet of mixed-use commercial and 116 apartments. We're bringing an entrepreneurship hub that might be usually in Center City to Kensington, and this would be our second model in West Philadelphia. This is particularly important to me. I was talking to one of my other partners, Sandra Dungy Glenn, this morning. I could probably do a TED Talk about 52nd Street and what it means to me. 52nd Street I used to live at 52nd and Chancellor. The first time I saw a dead body was at 52nd and Sampson at 9 o'clock at night, coming home from a party. The first time I heard Jesse Jackson speak was at 52nd and Market when my dad was working on the Jesse Jackson campaign. The first time I heard Obama speak, second time, was at 52nd and Spruce in 2008. I saw him do the wave drive-by in 2012, and I still have family members who use social services or use the corridor as what we like to call our Black American Main Street. So this is a project that is near and dear to my heart. This is a rendering of a building that's just coming online, as I mentioned earlier, at 3400 J Street, in partnership with Shift Capital. This is about 6 blocks north of Kensington and Allegheny at the Tioga stop. As I mentioned, there are 116 apartments in this project. On the first floor, Cafe, which is a Vietnamese coffee roaster, is opening their first brick and mortar location. And then If Lab will be adjacent to that. And If Lab stands for Idea Factory. So if you can imagine, in a community that has 51% unemployment, and most of the press that you will read about it is about things like the Allegheny and K&A stop being shut down for a multitude of issues. But spending 2 years and traveling to this community and also serving on the Kensington Quarter Trust, oftentimes when philanthropists, investors, even real estate practitioners work in the neighborhood, they don't actually walk in the neighborhood. They don't take the public transportation. They don't get the opportunity to see that between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. there's a rush hour, and that rush hour also encompasses grade school children, high school children, elderly people, and also a transient tourism pass through of people who are engaging in the drug war, let's just say. So when we talk about communities, oftentimes we don't have an imagination for something that is impactful, that is humanistic, that leaves spaces for people to have opportunity just for equity. And equity does not mean, for me personally, I'll just be very frank, I've spent about 5 years in diversity and inclusion think tanks, dinners. Some people even have luncheons and galas about the issue. Diversity and inclusion as an industry is about making white-led institutions look better or feel better about intergenerational public policy that has created a 10x differential between Black household wealth and white household wealth. So I'm not talking about workforce development programs. I'm talking about programs that give people imagination to be in the capital stack, to own a business. And I could say more or less about that topic. So everything I'm talking about is basically using entrepreneurship from a space of empowerment. So in the United States, school districts have a disparity, right? And in real estate, we have a term called AMI, area median income. So in neighborhoods like Kensington, Southwest Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, what people call the bottom, no, West Philadelphia, what people call the bottom. I think there's an area of North Philadelphia where people call the Badlands, right? And in those neighborhoods, there's approximately $13,000 a year per pupil. Now, in the western suburbs, some young people get $23,000, $25,000 in private schools. We know how high education can be. So if we expect people to have a fighting chance in a so-called meritocratic nation, how is it that we can invest $30,000 to $50,000 a year to incarcerate someone, and in Philadelphia, only 30% of third graders read on grade level? All right, hold on to that for a minute. I used to be on the board or the advisory board of the Greenlight Fund. And my colleague and my friend Omar Woodard had mentioned one time in a meeting that Black and Latino youth were 537 times less likely to have access to an entry-level internship or job in the region. And I know that in North Philadelphia, approximately 1/3 of the youth between 21 and 29 are not in school and not employed. And most of the solutions, particularly for people like me, right? I have very few academic credentials. I got my GED when I was in the Navy. I could talk less about that, right? And throughout my life, people tried to marginalize me into situations that would not have given me the equity and the capital to have access to that. So knowing figures like this, it's really hard for me when we speak about the violence that's happening in the city without taking into account these intergenerational public policies that put Black and brown children, particularly, in the rear in terms of opportunity and investment. And I like to say that in our work, I'm fortunate that my work to some degree is my therapy. I did not expect to have the access or the agility or even to be considered a leader by speaking up or trying to bring change to business. But I digress. So when most people think of invest, they think of investment strictly from a capital asset allocation perspective. And when I think about investment in cities, investment is an international capital product. My partner, Jacob, likes to say that the money's gonna flow. It's like water, right? And when the money flows, it does not usually empower Black communities. And Philadelphia is a city that's 43% Black, 67% POC or BIPOC, as we like to say. All right, so when I think of investment, I think of providing or endowing someone with something or a particular skill. If you go back to the picture of my parents endowed me with a spirit of collective or cooperative economics and a collective mindset of like, I'm not free unless I'm trying to free other people. And I try to do that through all my relationships, who I mentor, who I work with, who I partner with, who I vet to even consider partnering with. To go back to why it wasn't so easy to get Frank to get me here today. So some investments to the left are the fellows from the Institute of Hip Hop Entrepreneurship. Megan and I won the 2016 Night Cities Challenge to do a 9-month accelerator. With that, we had a 2-month call for ideas. We got 300 applicants. Of those applicants, we whittled those down to 50 finalists. And these were the 24 fellows, 50% men, 50% women, all African-American, right? From this class, my friend Tayyib Smith has a podcast and works in film. The gentleman in the red hat, that's my nephew, Sudan Green. His mother is a very famous poet from Philadelphia named Ursula Rucker, and Spirits Up is his startup. Chantel Bateman, who I believe is here in the audience, has her own agency with her husband, George Lawrence, who I also think is here. Ebony Zamani has a film collective and is working on a series of independent films. And I could speak from the heart about I could talk about all these kids because I love them like their family, and I still talk to most of them, and they still get on my nerves. To the right are board members and people who are a part of the family of the Black Star Film Festival. If you don't know what the Black Star Film Festival is, shame on you. Go to the link I believe I put in the chat and press donate, because we like to call it the Black Sundance. And there are many films that scale up to Netflix, and the first time people see them is here. So I'm very fortunate. I made a small investment in a film this year called Our Mother's Gardens. My friend Chantrell P. Lewis is the director and producer, and it comes out on Netflix on May 6th. Maori Holmes is the founder. She's just an amazing person who is a real city leader and someone you should consider having speak. My friend Erica Atwood is also in that photo. Heike Rice, who is just been such a mentor to me. She got me added to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts Advisory Board, I think in 2011. I resigned in 2017. That's another TED Talk. But from introductions like that, I'm now on the board of the Prism Art Fair in Miami, which is the largest African-American Caribbean art fair during Art Basel. And I've also been on the board of the Black Star Film Festival since inception. Let me see. Here we go. Real quick, I've been talking too much. This is some of the philosophy and how Megan and I use arts culture to communicate with communities. This is just a talking piece. I still have one of the copies. So Little Giants started from a venture with a former partner. I ended up buying out. I don't even say his name out loud anymore. But this cover was really important because it came from a debate. Because at the time, there was a cheesesteak place in South Philly that made people speak in English. And I found that to be really offensive because after doing some research, I found out that that person's grandfather did not speak English, and he had owned and worked in South Philadelphia. So for people to tell Hispanic or Latinx Americans that they needed to speak English, and a corridor and a city where that community undergirds a lot of our restaurants, a lot of our construction, and just Philadelphia is a history of exploitation, of migration and labor, regardless of what ethnicity you come from. I like to joke that Ben Franklin was a rabid racist and hated Germans. If you read about what Ben Franklin thought of Germans, it sounds like what people say about, you know, a tapestry of ethnicities throughout history. So this photo was staged with an American flag with a young woman that we thought at that time in 2010 represented the future of America. And I know, because we're marketers, that the average Latino, I think a few years ago, Hispanic, was 9. The average Asian or African American was 26, and the average white person was 57. So if we think about the uprisings of January 6th, or we think about a lot of ways that people have attempted to suppress the vote. Oh, Heike is here. There is a reasoning. And Frederick Douglass, who my friend Sam Katz is making a film about, has a famous quote that power concedes nothing without demand. And if we think about history in the United States, the reason that there was a New Deal is because there were unions and there were people making demands. Alan Dom's here, we get shout outs. There were people making demands that undergirded change, and that's reoccurring, but it does not look like the fictitious history told through a white lens of Eurocentric history. These are some of the other covers. This was probably right before some white guy from NBC discovered a band from Philadelphia that Ben had doing things since the 1990s, 1991 or 2, I can't remember. I was really fortunate. I was on the road with the Roots in year 2000. Before my current identity as a public rabble rouser, I got my chops in the music industry. This is the logo for Little Giant. It kind of speaks to a lot. I won't read this, but you can, and this is some of our philosophy. Some of our past clients, Philly 360 to the top was, I believe, our first nonprofit client. And that was through, wasn't an RFP, but somehow we got the work, and we created the first multicultural tourism campaign for the city of Philadelphia in the year 2009. Think about that and hold on to that, all right? Philadelphia, the home of Marian Anderson, where people like Nina Simone moved to, John Coltrane, Sun Ra, the Roots, Gamble and Huff. W. Du Bois did the first anthropological study of the urban environment about 6 blocks from my home. Billie Holiday used to live about 3 blocks from my home. The Tribune is the oldest continuing paper in print of African-American ownership at 150 years. And the first multicultural tourism campaign was in 2009, all right? I'm very fortunate that we were part of that, and it only lasted until 2012. So think about where we are. City Hall Presents, I think, came from a William Penn Foundation grant or Wincoat Foundation grant, and we did 32 art activations in the center of City Hall prior to Dilworth Plaza being redeveloped. Heineken Green Room was the proprietary activation we did for Heineken for about a decade in Philadelphia and New York. Vitamin Water on Tap is some old work, and that's some work we had done for Drexel. These are some of the other initiatives. The Institute of Hip Hop Entrepreneurship that I mentioned to you. Women-Led Cities is a project that my business partner, Megan Denenberg, created. You should ask her to come back and talk to you about that. One talking point most of my colleagues will hear ad nauseum is that I believe there are somewhere around 500 African-American women architects in the United States. We know how much intelligence exists within women, just within the feminine period, from elderly care, child care, transportation, and to only have less than 1% of the architect industry represented by Black women is a travesty. This is some information about the Institute of Hip Hop Entrepreneurship, which I mentioned earlier. Just to speak on that for a moment, we won that through the challenge with Knight Foundation, and that was a 3-year challenge of ideas that would have a positive impact on community. All right, for 4,500 ideas, 139 finalists. We won twice. All right, when I tried to rig up and get people to invest in this, I got no love. All right, today everyone's talking from CDFIs to the Biden administration to the DCED at the state about investing in Black and brown entrepreneurs. In 2016, people wanted to talk about workforce development. All right, this is a reoccurring experience that marginalized communities deal with on a continuum throughout history. And then often larger organizations cut and paste the work that we develop and move forward when the narrative changes. That's my good friend. If you don't know Freeway, you should probably not be in marketing or having anything to do with the city of Philadelphia. The man's songs are what we like to call the real national anthem. Jasmine Solano actually grew up in Philadelphia, but I believe lives in LA, and she's a very successful entrepreneur. A Dream Deferred was the second Night Cities Challenge that we won. This was a very complicated project that Megan led, and it essentially was taking our lived and life experience to actualize art, history, public policy to tell the story of the history of redlining in Philadelphia. And there was a 20-minute documentary about it that tells the story, particularly through the lens of Fork communities. And you can find that on the Little Giant YouTube. It was in I see Paul Stenke's face up here. I believe you attended, and this was in a Frank Furnacey building, I think, in an actual, is that correct, Paul?
On Spring Garden, yeah, Frank Furnace Bank
Yeah,
at 6th and Spring Garden. Frank Furnace designed, you're right.
Yeah, so Frank Furnace designed a lot of banks. Most of the buildings that he created no longer exist. I think he did like 123 in his lifetime. His father was a minister in Center City, but the idea of doing an exhibit around redlining in a bank was, like, to me, the perfect opportunity. All right, what has been more in tandem with economic inequality than the banking industry and the real estate industry? So to use the bank as a tapestry or a canvas to tell the story, we thought was a really powerful opportunity. And we did that in partnership with, not in partnership, we were able to get that funded by the Knight Foundation. And too many people are calling me. How do I get back? There we go. All right. That is, so the project was called A Dream Deferred. If you don't know, A Dream Deferred is a poem by Langston Hughes. And that is my colleague and actually my district representative, I should speak properly, Mr. Council Member Kenyatta Johnson. Let's see here. Oh, Truth to Power. In 2016, through some colleagues that I met in 2008, we were asked to help produce a 3-day pop-up at 930 Spring Garden Street. Officials come do a three-day pop-up using art to get people engaged in politics. I wish we had a better outcome. I really like the pop-up we used to the left. As you can see, it was very well received by millennials, young people, progressives, but most of the, let's say, traditional media kept its eyes on the stadiums. I could talk about my dislike for stadiums if anybody ever wants to hire me to talk about that for a second. You know, there have been 3 stadiums built in my lifetime in the last 20 years. If I look at who benefited from the flow of money, capital, investment, and jobs, it did not benefit people who look like me. It cost about $3 to $5 billion to build a stadium. If I wanted to invest that at 52nd Street in West Philadelphia or in things that benefited Black youth in particular, people would call me a socialist. Yes, Michael Murphy created that exhibit. It's toy guns and the shape of America. And if you looked at it from one angle, it showed America. If you looked at it from another angle, it's an actual handgun. And I followed that cop for about 10 minutes so I could trick him into being my stage just for that photo, because I'm a professional troll. So Smith and Roller is the partnership that me, Jacob, and Megan created several years ago. I believe we have about 23 projects at different stages of development throughout the city. Yeah. Kensington Quarter Trust. I joined the board. This is an old slide when my colleague John Grady was still around. Teams moved around a bit, but we're still moving forward. If you don't know about the Kensington Quarter Trust, our executive director, Adriana, joined about a year ago. We're attempting to raise $20 million to create the first community-controlled corridor. We're in dialogue with many financial institutions and social impact investors. So how am I doing on time?
You're doing fine. We have 20 minutes with Q&A.
Okay. All right, well, I'm bored with myself. Would anybody like to ask me questions? And I could stop sharing.
If people have questions, you can raise your hand. You can put them in the chat. But I would like to start. Tayyib, when we spoke, I didn't even realize everything that you've been doing. I tried to do my research, but you're doing so much, and I wonder how you focus. What's the most important to you right now? Any particular projects or initiatives?
At this second, getting my screen off, but that's a great question, and I'm horrible at answering things simply. I would say IFLAB, the Idea Factory, is the thing that I would like to focus on. It's a really important project. I would also say that the 7th Ward, I didn't get an opportunity to mention that. And I'm getting a bunch of text messages from my business partner, Megan, who keeps me on track. So the 7th Ward project, if you don't know, the 7th Ward is the neighborhood I live in. That is what brought W.D. Du Bois to Philadelphia. And it is the oldest community, to the best of my knowledge, that African-Americans have lived in since the founding of the city. So between river to river, you know, most people think of Mother Bethel at 7th and Lombard as the heart. And that's also where W. Du Bois's house. But we have no monument to 7th Ward. And we were very fortunate. We won the Pew Arts and Heritage Award this year to create the first public monument to that. Gather Food Hall is a partnership with Believe in Students that Megan is leading with my light-skinned brother, Richard Dilworth. Not Richard Dilworth, Richard Benswanger. I'm still thinking about Dilworth Park. Richard Dilworth is not my partner nor friend. He was complicit in urban development. And to quote James Baldwin, urban development just meant Negro removal, urban redevelopment. And then the collective. I'm very fortunate. I mentioned Sandra Dungy Glenn earlier. Her, along with my partners, Stephen Saunders, we created a B Corp and an investment fund with 8 members who are all real estate developers. Some who are in this audience, like my friend Lorraine Wilson Drake. Judy Wicks just joined. And we're looking to raise $100 million to invest in Black communities in Philadelphia. Did I answer your question?
Okay, you can hear me. Has the Black Star Festival opened up access to bigger Hollywood roles in front of and behind the camera for Philly's Black filmmakers and actors?
So behind the camera, yes. That makes, in front of the camera, I think is a complicated thing. From my lived experience, particularly go back to what I was saying about diversity, equity, and inclusion. In front of the camera is not always where you are in the capital stack, where you have agency or control, or where you have control over narrative. So there are a lot of films that I can't watch. And that is because they were designed or greenlit by people who don't have cultural competency about African-American history, are looking at things through a heteropatriarchal lens when it's something about a woman, or it's something like a Ken Burns film, which gets a tremendous amount of support and airtime, but has gaping wounds in regards to how it just will skip over a very important thing in a person's life because it doesn't fit the narrative of the institution that wrote the check to create it. So to come back to that, Black Star is the most important film festival in the United States, in my not so humble opinion.
Paul, do you want to?
Yes, thank you, Ben, and hello, Tayyib. Your redlining exhibit that you collaborated on at 6th and Spring Garden was amazing and so well done. I wish it was still on view. And I'm really excited about your 7th Ward work with the Pew Grant. My question for you is, there are a lot of business people on this call, and early on in your talk, you said something about how a lot of DEI work that corporations engage in is, just to paraphrase you, kind of like more window dressing than anything. And I wonder what advice you would have. I think there are a lot of people on this call who in this moment really sincerely would like to do a better job on encouraging diversity and equity and improving cultural competency within their organizations. What advice would you have to avoid the trap of it being window dressing and kind of like a box that's checked, but something that's really impactful and that changes the culture of companies and organizations?
Oh, so
not an easy question, I realize.
it's easy, but I'm going to just take it somewhere else, right? So I no longer have the patience or capacity to advise institutions that should be forced to do things. And as I quoted Frederick Douglass earlier, power concedes nothing without demand. Just today, a colleague shared an email with me with somebody basically saying that I was exactly right, but I was problematic. All right. And he said, I don't know why he would share that on record, so I could tell other people that he said that. All right. So I see Larry Krasner sitting on his couch, and I'm not going to pick on him, but he's got a new book out somewhere. The beginning is good. I'm not going to give him a 5-star yet, but the intro is very good. And I would ask at the state level, at the federal level, and at the municipal level that we start looking at how our pension funds are invested, and we do analysis of how money flows. And if it does not benefit the people who live within the city, or the youth, the elderly, or there's some level of parity, then the money needs to change. If people are still left with the opportunity to make decisions, to make cosmetic changes that still put Black and brown people and women in oppressive situations where there are bullet points and PR and advertising to carry something that does not have support at the trustee, at the board, or has the economic support to actually make change. So across sector, I see, in many different departments that I'm going to be nice and not call out, but in philanthropy and bureaucracy and investment, I see a lot of Black and brown people, and particularly women, put in positions where they have to carry bullet points that just aren't true institutionally from the organization. So I digress. George Lawrence has his hand up.
Hey, Tayyib.
How you doing, sir? Is your daughter here? Because she has hard questions.
Oh yeah, I don't want to, I don't want to put the pressure on you just yet. If she comes downstairs though, she might want to rumble. So my question is about development, and how do you see development at the very least addressing gentrification, and at its most impactful, reversing the gentrification and the trends of gentrification? And also, do you see development as a means for holding white-led institutions accountable for their role in gentrification?
Excellent question. And George, if you would have asked me that 2 years ago, I probably have a different answer. And the more I learn, the more I have to unlearn, right? So architecture as an industry, almost from its inception in Western culture, has been anti-Black. Like you have to, what I said earlier about the number of Black architects. So when we talk about gentrification, when I first got into real estate from a space of curiosity, and I started asking my partners like Jacob Roller and David Grasso and some other people in real estate, how do you do real estate without displacing people? Some people shrugged or didn't understand my question. And the response was, Tayyib, that is what real estate is. All right. So if you're in an industry and you're indoctrinated in the normality of not allowing people to have their full humanity in regards to community, there's a lot of work to do. All right. So we're fortunate that we create partnerships and we're in the actual equity stack and get to make decisions and can say no to some things. But if you're not in a position of power, things happen to you. And people of color, people of marginalized histories are manipulated on a daily basis by working in institutions where the public policy or the architecture or the milieu that they work within are not empowering them to actually make change. All right, so that's a very long gated way to say, I'm still trying to figure out every day. And sometimes we win, and sometimes, I get beat up or I piss people off or I walk away from a project. But it's a challenge. And if we're going to make change, kind of go back to Paul's early remark, from an institutional perspective, look at your capital stack, look at your purveyors, look at how you're hiring, look at the neighborhood that you're developing. Do you imagine someone being able to age in place when your project is there? Do you imagine your grandparents or your children benefiting or even being given the same level of service? Like I work with colleagues who actually think that they're well-meaning. And when you think about what they're offering a child within a certain census tract that is already born 10x differentiated away from wealth, right? Would you offer that to your grandparents? Right? Would you offer that to your children? And the reality is no. Some of the things, it pained me. I think that the Black Doctors Coalition did a brilliant job, but it pained me to see elderly Black people thankful for standing in line for 7 to 12 hours. And we know if people in the Western suburbs had to suffer like that, it would be uprisings like January 6th. Right? So if we can't imagine how to be more humanistic in the services and how we provide and how the leadership is, then some people need to retire, or actually not even retire. They need to, just like they do in corporate, keys, security, the door.
Okay, we have a couple more questions.
I don't know if you can hear me.
I do, and I miss you.
This is Karen Warrington. I want to go back to what you said, that power concedes nothing without a demand. And I kind of think some of these woke conversations have to do with the fact that when we had our uprisings in Philadelphia, the people who were discontented got all the way to Center City. And so people are now listening a little closer than they were. And in actuality, we've been saying the same thing for 20, 30, 40 years. And when institutions talk about they can't find people, the reality is what I've seen from inside government, both city government and federal government. We can come out with a big idea of inclusion, but the devil is in the details, that the people who ultimately make the decision aren't willing to move the needle. And because everything takes so long, your eye is off the immediate quest to get people into these positions, and then you move on to something else. So in actuality, nothing is done. When you look at this, the entrepreneurship of African Americans in Atlanta, which is like 30%, and in Philadelphia, it's like 2.5, that's ridiculous. The fact that we even had Black people standing in lines trying to get the vaccine when we're known as a city of medical breakthroughs and quality world-known medical institutions, and they were not part of it. When you see that we have Penn, we have Drexel, we have Temple, and our children are barely able to read and write when they come out of our public high schools. So if you don't have a good education base, you're not going to have the people who can come into these industries, can come into these different organizations and provide leadership. So until we really have an honest discussion about public education, we are not going to solve the problem of crime. We're not going to solve the problem of Black people not being at the table. And for those people who are part of this discussion today, if they're really interested, they need to reach out to people like Tayyib, who's connected to people who have the expertise, the time, the interest, and the background to really make a difference in some of these mostly white institutions.
Thank you, Karen. And if those of you who don't know Karen, Karen is a legend, is a journalist, has worked in politics. I believe was a choreographer and dancer, and a documentarian. And I call on her oftentimes when I don't know what to say to y'all. So, so someone put a question in from the director of the Way Club. So can I talk to investing in entrepreneurs and disparities in communities? Like, honestly, it's my whole life. Karen talked about public education. I'm a bibliophile, a kid with a GED. I got walked off Temple's campus from a tenured professor arguing with me because he was disrespectful to another young woman. And he told us that we couldn't get him fired because he was tenured, and that our little how do you describe it? Our little funding wasn't paying his salary. And I had already spent 4 years in the military and had been a couple places. Cuba, Panama. You're not going to speak to me that way. And he called security, and that was my last day at Temple. So I get asked to speak at the University of Pennsylvania, Temple, Drexel all the time. And the one thing I have to tell them is that when I was 13 years old, on a hot day, I rode my bike from 52nd Street to the campus, and I attempted to walk into the library, not understanding intellectually that a library could be private, and I was denied entry. And when I left that library, I never saw Penn the same. All right, and Penn denied the fact that its original trust, when it was the College of Philadelphia, I believe, came from the sale of Black bodies, and undergraduates outed them in 2016. All right, so Penn is the #1 employer in the state. There's so much I could say about that, and it borders 52nd Street. And that's something that I hold near and dear to my heart, because we can talk about the largest of institutions internationally, but you can't do anything for people who live in walking distance. And Mantua has, upwards of 36 or 40% poverty. So
it's just about 1 o'clock. We're having such a good conversation. There's more questions. So I just wanted to know how you are with time, and if anybody needs to go, we can just keep going if you'd like.
I'm sure Penn would like to move to the next question. Let's go.
David, did you want to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, Ty. Great to meet you. And thank you so much for being with us. This is amazing. When I hear all you've done, I kind of wonder where I've been. You know what I'm saying? So I was going to talk about education, and others brought this up just before me. I recently heard of a program that a woman of color developed in Seattle. It's called First Gen Cohorts. And this is a group of people that work with first generation college graduates, or those that are about to graduate, first generation of color, in terms of training how to interview, how to understand, how to better relate to, a whole host of coaching things for when they enter the world of work. So let's just say I'm a first generation graduate of color, and I don't really understand how to negotiate and work in a world that I don't understand, right? So these folks work and they coach and they help, and it's right from the heart. It's really great. So education is such a very important part of what we need in our region, right? It's probably the most important thing to get us going. So how do you feel about a program like that work? Actually, there's specific coaching in terms of how to do better, work better, understand, get to a point where you are. I'll stop.
Dave, just to interject, I added 2 links in the chat, and I kind of alluded to it earlier. Whether it was when I was on the Greenlight Fund, or in Megan and I's own work with the Institute of Hip Hop Entrepreneurship, or IFLAB, which is a new concept, some of the experiences that I've benefited from at the Ethical Real Development Salon in Chicago, working with the Esther Gates, like ideas are not unique, and there are a lot of people trying to make best practices. One of the problems is institutionally, there are a bunch of us getting here, right? But we can't get the scalability or change the industry to move from actually spending billions of dollars to teach people how to get an hourly wage job, but having no imagination to invest in the same communities that corporate America exploits through hip hop, through sports, through entertainment, through technology, right? So if you look at, as a refugee of the music business, it pains me that if you look at Spotify, if you look at Google Play, if you look at Apple, I know people who work in that industry. They do not look like kids from Philadelphia. And we don't even have programs to teach people digital literacy to understand how they can monetize and own their intellectual property. We have a lot of capacity to teach people how to have low wage jobs, how to be, in laundry services, how to be security, but we can't figure out how to get people whose parents work in things that undergird our pensions in our city, the frontline workers, the people who end up in the gig economy. We can't figure out how to actually have the courage to invest in the same communities that we use parasitic capital to benefit from. So there, there's great programs in Seattle, but I'm a proud Philadelphian. We got some great people working in Philadelphia who are doing things, who can't even get the meetings that I can. And when I do get the meetings, I tell them about kids like Yeah Philly in West Philadelphia, who are doing on the ground conflict resolution in communities and teaching kids how to teach people not just how to stop fist fighting, but stop shooting each other. And people will tell me about some stuff in sub-Saharan Africa that I should be doing. Right? So we need to navel gaze within walking distance of our neighborhoods. And there is brilliance in these streets, but we need to maybe change how we're looking at that and invest in them.
Okay, thank you.
Chantel asks, a few years ago, as part of a study group working to understand models for developing housing co-ops, our greatest challenge was, of course, funding. We found there was a lot of hesitancy to fund collective ownership. Have you noticed any changes in the market regarding cooperative lending, or are there other social impact investors funding cooperative ownership?
So I believe I see Chrissy Kind here. Hi, Chrissy. And the Kind Family Foundation made approximately, I think, $500,000 investment in the Kensington Corridor Trust. And the Kensington Corridor Trust is, to some extent, a change in the tide of cooperative models. And I think there's a challenge in getting the industry to even have an imagination for co-ops. And I think Judy Wicks is here. I'm on Judy's board at All Together now. Our colleague Jamela runs an organization that I'll probably mess up the name, but it's Philly Co-ops. Is that, Judy, can you correct me? Is that right? She's probably doing 10 things in her own presentation.
Area, I'm sorry, my video is not working. It's the Philadelphia Area Alliance for Cooperatives, or Cooperative Alliance, PACA.
Thank you. So I'm fortunate. I was joking to George Lawrence that Sam Katz, Judy Wicks, John Morris are like let's say my older class of the Institute of Hip Hop Entrepreneurship. They call on me for advice, and they also help me speak to people who don't necessarily want to hear from me. I don't know why, but I ruffle some people's feathers. Anybody else?
You may have spoken to it because it just continued from what you were just saying, but Lauren asked if you could speak more about the Kensington Corridor Trust when it launched, how some of the local nonprofit organizations within the community are you able to support at this time?
So as a good board member, because I've learned a lot over time, I'm going to give you the website link, and I'm going to encourage you to talk to Adriana, the executive director, because bad board members pontificate about things that they're not updated on, or they shouldn't be speaking about from a fiduciary perspective. Yeah, that word.
Oh, Hope? Hope, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Is that the Lauren Tillman? Wow.
Hope, can you?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. My question is, I've heard, about education, and I'm hearing about, so many issues that Philadelphia is facing. And it's almost like trying to drink the ocean. So my question is, some of your
Can you repeat that? It faded out. Just the question.
okay,
Your connection towards the end broke up.
what are some of Okay, what are your immediate social impact goals? If there was one thing that you could change in 2021, 2022, what would that
Oh, okay. So there was like $1.7 trillion allotted to cities from the Biden administration. Um, Things like this happen on repeat. If you remember empowerment zones, opportunity zones, keystone zones, usually there are financial packages that enable the same institutions to benefit from the money flowing. The money needs to flow to people who look like me. The money needs to flow to African-American women who I believe are starting companies at the highest percentage. From my understanding of the region's demographics in urban cores, the average Philadelphian is probably a 35-year-old woman of color. So if we're not thinking about how to make our boards, our investments, and what people in wealth management like to say KPIs, like performance indicator language, do not meet metrics that benefit people that have some parity with the demographics of a city, then some things need to change. I want money to actually flow so that we don't have that 10x differential in household wealth between Black families and white families. And then also, I have to say, there are a lot of just intellectually disingenuous stereotypes about Asian communities and Pacific Islander communities when, I think Cambodian boys and Afro-Latino boys suffer at higher rates than African-American boys in this region. And there's just a lot of whitewashing in how we talk about data. Yeah, so investment.
Just one last question. Pennsylvania is home to the two northernmost HBCUs in America. Both are annually in danger of closing. Why are people and organizations of all colors not helping these institutions?
Whew. You're gonna end on that? Okay. I just speedball. I would recommend a book called Our Kind of People. I would also say that Philadelphia is the home of the Boule, the Lynx, and Jack and Jill were all founded in Philadelphia. The reasoning for that is that there is a deep history of representation does not have a class alliance with the most marginalized, right? So my friend Karen Warrington told me once that a lot of the more light-skinned people of power in this region were actually the illegitimate children of Quakers, right? And my friend Momo, who is a teacher in the city, he was telling me about a story that a fourth grader raised her hand and told him that Quakers never owned slaves, right? And that's just disingenuous, right? So there's a way that we deal with history that we need to refocus when we talk about a lot of these things. So to get back to the issue of those historical institutions, Cheney started as the Institute of Colored Youth at 9th and Bainbridge. And then a white man named Cheney donated some land in Westchester. All right. And to be frank, in the African-American community, we know that Westchester University is waiting to usurp Cheney University. And we also know that for more than 40 years, Harrisburg, which has never been to a friend of the Black community or, well, Harrisburg has a lot of Black people. The Harrisburg legislator has never been a friend to Black people or the city of Philadelphia. So with that said, there was an intentionality in underfunding those institutions and then also then holding them accountable for some of the ramifications of their underfunding. So until we are going to deal with that history with the lens of restitution and dealing with the reality of the disrespects and the intentionality of divesting from them and then holding them to a 21st century standard, we can't really talk about them.
That's all I have, all I was able to find in the chat. There was a lot of comments and questions. So unless anybody has anything else, I just want to thank you, Tayyib, for taking the time and finally agreeing to speak. Maybe we'll do something else again another time.
I would like to maybe recommend some other people and some other voices, both young and old, and when for you to consider, because one of my favorite African proverbs is, if you want to go far, go with many. So a lot of people think of me, but there are a lot of people with me who are with us today, and some of us who aren't. You know, I stand with my ancestors, and I stand with the youth who were out turning up ruckus on June 3rd of last year.
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
I appreciate us.
We'll stay in touch, and yes, if anybody has any suggestions for speakers or events, we're always interested.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank
You
you.
guys have a
Okay.
good
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending.
Great meeting you.
We'll see you soon.
buy Larry's book. Help him out.